Hello, and welcome to the Cambridge Skeptics live stream. My name is Erica. I am here with Andrew, Chris, and Sam. The Cambridge Skeptics are a volunteer organization. We are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, science, and positive skepticism in our local community of Cambridge, but also across the UK and beyond. And today, we are going to be talking about social influence. And Chris is going to kick it off. Chris, tell us about social influence.
Yes, so last time I was in the chair 2 months ago, we looked at the defense put forward by Anthony Antonio, who was one of the rioters at the Capitol insurrection. And his lawyer sort of blamed what he did on Fox News and media influence. And we discussed that and decided that media influence was just a small part of a much greater social and cultural influence. And obviously, one of the lawyers was listening to us because Jake Angeli, or QAnon Shaman's lawyer, has put forward the defense that America was to blame for his client's actions on that date. So he blamed the whole of America from former and future President Trump on up. So what I wanted to do today is have a look at the sort of power social influence has over our lives and the experiments and theories that have been put forward by social psychologists in this area. So the first person I was going to talk about, the founder of modern social psychology, is Muzaffar Sherif. He was a Turkish-American psychologist, and he was teaching in Berlin in the early 1930s. So he sort of took an interest in the rise of Nazis and the way they used propaganda and social control. And he wanted to test the theory that reality as we know it is a social construct. And the way he decided to do this is using something called the Autokinetic Effect. Are you familiar with the Autokinetic Effect?
No. I do know ancient Greek, though.
Excellent. Can you translate?
Self-movement.
Yes. So the autokinetic effect is something the brain does when it doesn't have enough reference points. It sort of imagines movement where it isn't there, as in this nauseating picture that's making you a little bit queasy right now. I've been using this to prepare for my upcoming sailing voyage. So yeah, hang on, let me get that away from you.
Oh God.
So one way the autokinetic effect is particularly powerful is if you have a single light in the night sky with no other reference point around it. And it's been theorized this is where a lot of UFO sightings come from. You have a single light, you have no other reference point, and you sort of imagine it's moving. In fact, there was a case in the newspaper last week. A trainee police officer up in Scotland panicked because she thought she was being followed by a drone. And she dashed back to the police station and got her colleagues out to look, and it turned out to be Jupiter. So yeah, people make this mistake. You see a single light, you have no reference point, you imagine it's moving. Even Alexander Humboldt, the great theoretician, fell for this. He saw this and he imagined something he called swinging stars. He imagined there were stars that moved because of the autokinetic effect. So yeah, so what Sherif did is he had a darkened room. He projected a light source at one end, a small pinprick light. He had 3 participants, and he told them to estimate how much the light moved. Of course, the light didn't move, it was all in their mind. So let me find.
No, not that again.
Oh God.
How do I get to the next picture? There we go, good.
No.
So
Data.
what he did is he broke the trial down into 3 stages. The first stage, the participant was alone, and they would estimate the movement, and they would get wildly different estimates. Then he would have a group trial where the three participants were sat together and they would be able to see what the other person was saying. And he found that their estimates started to come together. And slowly, as you do repeated tests, their estimates converge. But then the interesting thing is the third part of the trial, you take the participant out and you put them individually again, and you see that they maintain that same estimate. They don't go back to their original estimate. They stick with the group estimate, even when they're back in the individual condition. So what we theorize this shows, or what Deutsch and Gerard theorize this shows, is something they call informational conformity. So when you don't know the answer, you look around you to see what other people are saying. And yeah, they say this is a very powerful drive in humans. If we don't know the answer, we look around and see what other people are doing.
I mean, like, you've also just summarized what my job is like, what it's like to be in a meeting at work.
So yeah, so you agree with this then?
Yeah,
so far.
As soon as I saw the data, I was like, yep, oh my God.
There is a basically, well, very similar thing. And there's an episode of Mindfield by the guy that does Vsauce, or by Vsauce, I don't know how to refer to him.
Michael,
but Michael from Vsauce, in which they are kind of going, actually, is this line the same? Which of these lines is the same as this other line?
That's the Ash paradigm. We'll be coming on to that one next.
Okay, in that case, I'll leave it for then.
So yeah, so the idea is that we look around us to see what other people are doing. We take our information from them, and we internalize this. So even after we're out of that situation, we keep this belief. Could this sort of informational influence explain the activities of the insurrectionists on January the 6th?
Maybe.
Yes, it's.
Wait, let's figure out what each other is thinking, and then we'll answer.
So I think what you've got is, I mean, if you use this graph, for example, and rather than the movement, the points represent how far should we take this. And so you've got the person at the top who's like, let's burn the Capitol down, and the people at the bottom who are maybe less inclined to do that. But with everybody coming together, you end up on a consensus of we'll storm the building.
That was a happy medium, was it?
Yeah, that's the happy medium between burn it down and just watch. And yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely there's the element of, you look to see what other people are doing and you take your cue from them. And as I'm sure you're going to come on to, with groups and stuff, they often tend to have the lowest common denominator being the driving force anyway.
How is setting a building on fire like the lowest common denominator? Aren't people like inherently lazy? Like, isn't there a whole like social inertia thing? Just do it the way that it's been done before, but the way that it's been done before without arson?
Probably. I know that would be my approach, but
one thing I do find curious about this, though, is the extreme one has really come down to meet where the other two are. They've barely moved, and so when it comes down to sort of convincing stuff, actually you can create this sort of wave of consensus where you end up with a small group that are very determined. They then convert people round near them because they sort of because they're kind of the average is actually for the other people to move to them, and then they can move out, and you can almost create this ripple where very few people started off with this opinion, but through like consecutive recruiting, they can end up expanding quite quickly.
I think here it's also implied that it's an average of the sort of like the average opinion is this the way that things get going. Like, at least here it seems to sort of literally average out. Whereas I wonder what would happen if subject one was a very strong, charismatic, persuasive personality? Would you actually see one person have the ability to swing everything that way? Because I think when it comes down to like committing armed insurrection against your country, that's a fairly extreme viewpoint. That's not the average of the people talking.
Yeah, minority influence is something we will come back to.
Oh, okay.
So this is Sharif's ideas. See. So someone that was heavily influenced by Sharif was Ash. So Ash was not convinced that Sharif's experiment was showing conformity because there was no correct answer. Are we really conforming if there's no correct answer? We're just trying to find a medium. It's what any of us would do if we saw something unexpected. We would check with the people around us to see they were saying the same thing or seeing the same thing. So what Ash wanted to do was put them in a situation where it was unambiguous. The opinion, the majority opinion in the room was wrong.
That sounds like my work. So.
Yeah, so he came up with the Ash paradigm, which is the lines I guess you were mentioning earlier.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have 3 lines, you have an example, and you're asked to match the example to the 3 lines, to one of the 3 lines. And as you can see, it's pretty clear which is the right answer. So he'd line up his participants in a room, and he'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stooges giving the wrong answer, and 1 guy second from last who's a genuine participant. And if you watch the videos, you can see the panic on the face of the genuine participant as he's put in this situation where everyone around him is giving the wrong answer with confidence. So what he found is that around, what was it, a third of his participants conformed at some point in the test.
Wow.
And this is supposed to show normative influence. So the first one was informational influence. This is normative influence. And the idea is you want to fit in, you want to belong, you don't want to stand out and be different. So you go along with the group. As you can see, there are some people that never conformed.
I would like to believe that I'm in that category. I don't know, but like I honestly think like I would be like, you guys are all crazy, or like something would happen, but like I don't know, there's just something in me that like I really hope that I would be like, I have to be a whistleblower here if you guys are all on Kool-Aid.
Are you thinking of the Stanford prison experiment as well? Just like that?
Yeah.
That is. We will be coming back to that.
I saw actually, Chris. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but one of the personality tests that you gave us was by Zimbardo.
Yeah.
Anyways, keep going.
We will come back to that if we got time. So yeah. Ash tried it with a different number of people. He found if there's one other participant, there's no desire to conform. If there's 2 other people, there is a small but significant desire to conform. And by the time you get to 3 or more people, that desire to conform is there and doesn't really change much.
It's curious that when you get to 15,
Well, what he found is if you get a lot of people conforming, a lot of people lying, then the participant starts to get suspicious and starts to think there's a conspiracy going on.
Well, yeah, I'm also curious about there being an element of potentially sort of disconnect. I wonder in that if there's a small group of people, you kind of have to face them as individuals, whereas if they're sort of a nameless group, is there less of a
definitely
less peer pressure?
Group psychology shows more than 30 isn't a group anymore. If you can't identify each person by face and name, you're not a group anymore. So yeah, it has less influence. I don't know how that played into what happened on January the 6th.
I think there's aspects of anonymity within the crowd and stuff like that coming into play as well. So.
Yeah, that's definitely something we'll come back to. I've got a lot to get through today. I hope you don't have plans.
It's fine. No, we don't have anything in the oven. Don't worry.
Someone who refined Ash's work is a guy called, whose name I've just blanked on. Good. Crutchfield. So Crutchfield, obviously Ash's paradigm is very ineffective cost-wise. You need to have 6 stooges to every single participant. So what Crutchfield did is he put them into different rooms and you could just see what the other people were choosing by lights that lit up. Mm. And of course, Crutchfield was controlling the lights, not really the participants. So he did this thing where you had to decide which shape had the biggest area. So similar to the lines. Mm. What he also did is he tried them out on a number of statements to see if he could get conformity to sort of more realistic things like statements. So some of the statements were, the life expectancy of the American males is only 25 years. Americans sleep 4 to 5 hours per night and eat 6 meals a day. And really worryingly, free speech being a privilege rather than a right, it is only proper for society to spend free speech when it feels itself threatened.
Wow.
Again, on the individual stage, most people would disagree. On the group stage, he could get about 1/3 to agree to this.
And now I see where we're headed.
Right, so, yes. So this normative influence where you want to fit in, you want to be part of the group, but you don't really believe in what they're saying. You accept it publicly, but you deny it internally. So when he put them back in individually, in Sherif's experiment, they kept the same belief. In the Ash and Crutchfield experiment, they reverted back to their original beliefs. They're just publicly conforming and privately not believing it.
Do you think that comes down to the nature of the experiment, though? Because obviously you said that with the light experiment, there wasn't really a correct answer. So they were kind of just guessing, and you have the sort of, I guess, the wisdom of crowds type thing that, you know, if a lot of people are guessing, you're probably going to get somewhere near the right answer.
Yeah.
Whereas with the other one, there was actually a correct answer. And so when you evaluate it afterwards, you're like, well, I got that wrong. I said the wrong thing. Why did I do that? Well, I clearly know what the right answer is. So
some of the people he interviewed, most of them said, yeah, no, I knew it was wrong. Some of them were genuinely confused. And they said, you know, I thought that must have been the right answer. I thought maybe there was something wrong with my vision. So you did have some informational influence, but the majority is normative influence. So relating this back to January the 6th, attacking the Capitol is clearly wrong. And presumably most people know this. So were they doing this just to fit in? To be part of the crowd?
I was chatting with Ellen earlier about this, and we were saying that you have this idea that maybe you're like, okay, I'm willing to go this far. And again, as I was saying earlier, you're willing to go so far, but you see other people are going further, so you go further, and then they see you're going further, and then it's kind of yeah, it's sort of egging each other on, I suppose. Is that, you know, you see that the people around you are okay with doing something, so you think it must be okay to do, and or maybe not okay, maybe you think it's the right thing to do, because I think. Yeah. If you put these people in another situation and said, is, you know, trying to overthrow the government an okay thing to do, they'd probably say, no, it's not the legal or the okay thing, but maybe it's the moral or the right thing to do, sort of thing. You know, there's two different ways of looking at it. But,
well, yeah, and I'd add that I think that there's a couple of elements there. It's, yeah, from many of their stated points of view, is that wasn't a legitimate government because they were confirming an illegitimate president from their point of view. But also, there's already, I think there's an argument to be made that you're not looking at a third of them. If we're seeing this 1/3 being this constant number, it's not the case that a third of the crowd would be influenced like this. I suspect there's a survivorship bias, that the people who were already at the rally were already biased towards this more sort of influenceable group of people, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, we know there were extremists in that crowd, and we know that was not a normal selection of people.
There were essentially the equivalent of the stooges in the experiment, the people who wanted it to go that far in the first place and were convincing the people who would probably have given the right answer under other circumstances that it was okay to give the wrong answer, so to speak. Which I guess is possibly what this guy's defense is that, I wanted to give the right answer, but everyone else was telling me that my answer was wrong and that this was the right answer. And so...
Yeah, a lot of these people have seemed to have rejected this belief now that they're in court, and whether that's a tactical move or whether they were just carried along by the moment and normative influence, and they knew all along it was wrong, is perhaps a question to consider.
Yes.
Okay, this brings us on to minority influence, I think. So Serge Moscovici looked at the Ash experiment and said, well, actually, this isn't about majority influence. If you had the world's population look at those lines, they would tell you the right answer. The group of people you had telling you the wrong answer are actually the minority. So if you think about if any of us had ended up at the QAnon riots or a flat Earth conference, our beliefs wouldn't suddenly become the minority view just because we're surrounded by people with strange viewpoints. So Moscovici said, this is actually a minority influencing the majority we're seeing here. And he started experimenting with this idea. So what he did is he had a set of slides of various shades of blue. And he would put one person in each group who would say they're green. And the rest of the participants would have to decide if they were blue or green. And what he found is he was able to influence slightly some of the people. There did seem to be some doubt planted in their mind by this one person consistently saying
did they're green. He test for color vision accuracy beforehand?
I don't know.
It's like, one would hope so. If you know you're colorblind, you're gonna be like, hey, whatever, man. You tell me what color it is.
Hopefully he did that.
Yeah, presumably.
So he found certain things made you able to persuade, a minority able to persuade a majority more. Firstly, the minority's behavioral style. You need to be consistent, both synchronically and diachronically. Everyone in your group must say the same thing, and you must say it repeatedly over time. You need to be committed. And you also need to be confident. You need to be confident, consistent, and committed in your viewpoint. You need to encourage people to go beyond basic thinking. They need to go into deep thought. Not necessarily correct thought, but they need to have to think about things deeply. You need to be flexible. So you need to have a certain sense of agreeableness. You need to come to meet them. You need to accept lesser victories. And you need them to identify with you. And if you have these elements, apparently a minority can persuade a majority to change its views. And this is how society changes, according to Moscovici. This is how we get the suffragettes changing our minds on women's votes, and the civil rights movement changing our minds on black rights, and the gay rights movement. by conforming to these rules, they're able to change people's opinion, the majority opinion, over time. So I've got the process here, and I want to, Andrew, you spoke last time about flat Earth. I want to see if this sounds familiar to you, this process. So it begins with exposure to the minority view. It's followed by an intrigue and a desire to understand that view. You then go into a deep processing of the minority view, trying to understand it better. And eventually this results in you, while you publicly reject that view, you privately accept it. And then at some point you will come out of the flat Earth closet.
I'm pretty sure that's the exact list I gave.
Yeah.
When we were talking last time.
Yeah, so that's how Moscovici says minority influence works. And the way he tested this is fantastic. So he went back to his blue slides. And obviously people would say they're blue, even if they thought they were green. So what he did is he removed the slide and got them to tell him what color the after image was. So if you're seeing blue, you will say the after image is sort of a yellowy orange. If you're seeing green, you'll say the after image is sort of reddy purple. And he found people were saying the slides were blue, but the after image was a reddy purple. So, yeah, that's what I thought when I read that.
Interesting.
But that feels even less.
It is
more confusing.
It is a very controversial experiment and doesn't seem to have been replicated that well. So yeah, could minority influence have been a big factor in influencing these people on January 6th? Yes, yeah. No, aliens, got it.
Yes.
And it does remind me of a similar case that I was reading about months ago of basically sort of bidding for a potential oil field where you had something like a dozen contractors and they all had basically deeply inconclusive reports, except you had one that had a slightly positive report when actually, you know what, this might be worth something, and one that had a completely erroneous, very positive report that was like, yeah, this is an absolute goldmine. And the one with the really positive report went first, put in a big bid. And then the one with the slightly positive report looked at them and went, okay, well, they probably know something we don't. We think it might look okay, but maybe they've got more information. So they put an even bigger bid. And by that point, everyone's like, well, I don't know anything, but these guys apparently really like it. And so you ended up with this massive bidding war over this complete pile of, this rubbish, just because they'd sort of carried over the information in a sort of an uncertain space, which is, I know, is a little different to sort of what we're saying, but if
no, it sounds like exactly the they're consistent, they're
loud,
confident.
Yeah, loud, confident, consistent. Who does that remind you of?
Like somebody persuading you that something is green and not blue, where like say like there's an objective truth, that's one thing, but somebody persuading you to do something morally reprehensible, like murder or something, like that's quite extreme.
It is at the same time in the case of the Capitol riots, the insurrection, because it went beyond a riot. There was a lot of uncertainty. They were being told he couldn't possibly have lost, that he hadn't lost, that he had won on the night, and there was a lot of uncertainty. So a small number of very determined voices saying, hey, they're stealing our government from us.
And I think if you play devil's advocate on it and say, okay, let's say they were right. Let's say the election was actually stolen, that some forces within the government had rigged it so that Trump wouldn't win when he actually did. Then arguably, as some kind of insurrection against the government is the right thing to do. It's if your democracy is taken away from you, you should fight to get it back. So you can completely see how, from their point of view, they were doing the morally right thing. And if you have a few people, the few loud, confident voices, especially when some of those voices are literally the leaders of your country, saying, here's what we need to do, we need to stand up, we need to fight, we need to take this back and not allow this to happen. I can completely see how people would be, driven to do things that normally would be potentially beyond what they would be willing to do, especially if we're saying that there are potentially stooges within the crowd who are pushing them to those more extreme actions. So yeah, I can completely see how it can happen, and you can feel morally justified in doing it, even if you know you're breaking the law.
Yeah, picking up on Sam's point about uncertainty, uncertainty does seem to be a big factor in this sort of conformity. So Ash did a version of the lines where they were much closer together. So he took it back to being an ambiguous situation again, and conformity went up. And there was a couple of variations on the Sharif experiment. He had one where they were greeted by a very helpful lab assistant who showed them the room in the light, showed them where their seats were going to be, helped them into their seats, and then set out the experiment. And in those situations, conformity went down. And they did another one where the lab assistant was very unhelpful and they had to find their way to their seats in the dark using ropes and steps to get to their seats. So they were very bewildered and confused and uncertain, and yeah, conformity went up. So yeah, the uncertainty of the situation seems to have a huge impact. One last theory I want to throw in here is self-categorization theory, John Turner's idea. And he said, let's get rid of, how do you know if it's informational or normative influence? They seem to be both play a part. So let's just get rid of that. And he said, people basically just want to conform to their in-group. These are the people you know, these are the people you trust, these are the people you identify with. You just want to conform to your in-group. And I think that was probably a big part of what happened there. They were very much thought they were one group with one mind and one purpose, whereas they may not have been.
Is that the de-individualization thing?
Oh, excellent. We will maybe get time to that.
Okay. Cool.
I think I might run out of time. We might have to do a part 2 at some point.
He'll probably change his defense and you'll have a whole new topic to talk about.
Well, he has.
He has already.
He's been found mentally incompetent, basically. So he's been found to suffer from a huge number of mental disorders, and they're negotiating. But I planned all this before that happened, so I'm not going to talk about that. Okay. So as well as blaming America, they've put particular blame on someone called Donald Trump. And so I want to look at the concept of obedience as well as the concept of conformity. And the obvious place to begin this is with the question, are Germans evil?
Hang on.
So this was a genuine question following the Second World War. There was this idea that Germans were somehow different from other people, and that other people wouldn't have gone along with the Nazi regime the way the Germans did.
Well, it does briefly remind me of a quote that always puts me to mind when we're talking about QAnon, which is that the first country the Nazis invaded was their own.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, that is
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
they're not, but they are. Yeah. Sorry, I've thrown you off now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the person that picked this up and really ran with it was, of course, Theodor Adorno, the Frankfurt School cultural Marxist.
You say that like I've heard of him before.
We talked about him in our last discussion.
Obviously.
He was the man that was pushing the hypodermic needle theory.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, and yeah, there's various conspiracies about the Frankfurt School controlling society, basically. But yeah, most of Theodor Adorno's theories seem to have been quite wrong. Mainly because he took the ideas of Marx and the ideas of Freud and combined them together. And when you take the ideas of two pseudoscientists and put them together, the results aren't going to be great.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came up with this test. So he worked out the factors of authoritarian personality. They are ethnocentrism, obsession with rank and status, respect and submission to authority figures, and a preoccupation with power and toughness. And he created a questionnaire to measure this, which we all did.
Yes, that's why I know his name.
So, Sam, you're our expert on personality tests. What did you think of the F scale?
Bunkum. It's the number of, so first off, as with all of these things, it's self-report. And so whilst you might think that you're very liberal or very authoritarian, you might not be. But also the number of questions that you use and the ambiguity of the question meant that I don't think you could really read all that much into the answers. Maybe there's some very broad trends, but
super funny because one of like the questionnaire was written like it was like verbatim from like the 1950s, and there was a question about like foreign people are sources of disease, and we're all like, yes, they are.
We're in a pandemic.
We're in a pandemic, yes, that's what happened. But not in the way that the questionnaire meant.
So yeah, you had to imagine you were in 1950s.
Yeah, I read that question.
So yeah, we all came out as quite not fascist.
Yes.
Yes.
I liked the categorization. I think I was a
whining rotter.
I was a whining rotter. You were a liberal or something like that.
I was a bleeding heart liberal.
You were a bleeding heart
liberal. Liberal airhead, I think it was.
that was it, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't as bad as you are.
Whining rotter, sorry.
Apparently, apart from the fact that I apparently hate all people and want to destroy things, so.
But yeah, that's true, isn't it?
It was interesting. Like one of the areas where I scored, I think like differently from you guys was on like the sex thing. So like the questionnaire had like this thing of, like moral corruption being a thing that we should be concerned about, which like from a fascism perspective kind of makes sense. But the questions were like, are you worried that like people have crazy sex lives? And I was like, no. Why is that worrying?
There was the big one for you, I think, was something like we've debased ourselves from the moral purity of the Greeks and Romans, and you being an archaeologist are just like
not what I've dug up. No. Cool. Okay, so Stanley Milgram is the guy that decided to put this to the test
with electrodes.
No, there were no electrodes, but there was one electrode. There was one small electrode involved. Where's my picture?
Ooh.
I've lost my pictures.
Yeah, we can act it out. Just pretend to be.
Do you want the button, or you do the button?
I'll do the button. Okay, Andrew, should I turn the dial up?
Why have my pictures vanished? What's happened here?
Fine, it's fine. We've acted it out. It was beautiful.
Okay, good. So yeah, so he created this machine that looked like it was going to deliver a series of heavier and heavier shocks, and he got together a group of middle-class white guys from his neighborhood and got them to see how far they would go if an experimenter told them to keep shocking the subject. The subject, of course, was just a stooge who was acting.
Better than I was, hopefully.
But the participants didn't know that. Before the experiment, he did a survey of various professionals, sort of various middle-class white males, like the participants were going to be psychology students and psychiatrists and psychology experts. And they predicted 10% would go over 180 volts. In actual fact, about 100% went to 300 volts and about 65% went all the way up to 450 volts, which was marked on the machine as XXX.
Wait, no, I feel like I remember something about the reproducibility of this experiment isn't consistent.
It's actually been fairly good. It's been produced fairly well. Obviously, there are cultural factors that change it.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, it's been fairly well reproduced.
Cool.
Or not.
Well, yeah, like horrible for humanity.
So, were the Capitol rioters only obeying orders?
I mean, like we literally know.
Oh, there you go. I've got the picture working. Yeah, we go.
Wow, beautiful.
So yeah, you have a fake subject who pretends, an experimenter who encourages you to keep going, and there you are administering shocks on your machine, which looks something like this, going up to this lovely XXX button.
Damn.
So at various stages along the way, the participant would respond with screams, with complaints about his heart. He'd set up in advance he had a heart condition. And the experimenter was told
we have ethics boards. Now we have like psychological review boards that don't let us do tests like this.
No fun.
Well, I think that these sorts of things often do get done, but they basically have much better safeguards in place and like debriefing and psychiatrists afterwards. And...
Yeah, like not for the fake subject, but obviously for like the trauma that the tester goes through.
Oh yeah, the debriefing processes you have to go through. I mean, the amount of ethics paperwork I had to fill in when I just got people to look at a magic trick. So.
So yeah, I mean, who is this? Milgram's career was severely affected by the response to this. He had trouble getting work after this.
Interesting.
But yeah, he did debrief his subjects afterwards, and he tried to tell them they did the right thing.
Okay, good.
So yeah, what does this tell us about the people that were there on January 6th? Were they?
I think
just normal people doing what we would all do in that situation.
Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, well, I have a vague feeling of having seen an alternative of this where the person telling them to keep going isn't an authority figure, and in those cases they don't fairly quickly. Yeah. It's the authority that makes it.
This is interesting.
That makes it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So here we have the various variants. Where is it? There's one where ordinary man as experimenter.
It drops down.
It drops down.
Oh.
Yeah. And then what's contradictory E?
So if you have two experimenters and they're giving contradictory orders, it drops right down. So.
Okay. So and is this the proportion of people that got all the way to the end or got all the way past a certain point? Yes,
this is the one that went all the way to the end, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's but that leans into both of them in that you've got the ambiguity. So, to get back to your previous points, saying things, you need it to be consistently said by the group. That contradictory experimenters completely destroys that sort of arm of the influence.
Can I ask about women?
Yes, I was saying that.
Women.
Yeah.
It was the 50s. What are you going to do?
Was the experimenter woman or was the subject a woman?
That variant was done with women as the subjects.
Okay.
Interesting.
I remember there was one in particular that rebelled very early on, and it turned out she was a concentration camp survivor.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
That really lowers your ability to conform, apparently.
Yes.
I can imagine. But yeah, so but it feels like if the crowd around you is all shouting stuff and you've just been sent off by your outgoing president and all of his cronies having told you, hey, you know where the you know what's happening, you know where it's happening, it's just over there, look at it, isn't it just over there, wouldn't it be terrible if you went down and stopped it? That kind of probably ticks the box from a certain authority point of view, and then the crowd itself probably has some authority in addition to then having a very consistent message of we've got to stop the steal.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm sure obedience and conformity both played into what they did and why.
And I
they
guess
did it.
you have the again with this experiment, you had them constantly pushing them on to do the next step. And if again, coming back to the stooges in the crowd, if they're all going, yes, we should go past that barricade, yes, we should go up the steps, yes, we should go through the door, and pushing you on every step of the way, saying keep going, and this is what the president said we should do, this is what we're doing this for our country, you should definitely do this, you have no choice but to do this. Because I think that was one of the lines they said in this experiment, you have no choice but to continue.
That's interesting. That was the last one. You have no choice but to continue. And that was the one that caused the most disobedience.
Interesting.
Well, being
People
told they
did
have
not
to.
like being told they had to do it. That was the point they would rebel, a lot of them.
Okay, that does make sense now. Okay, yeah. Yes, because that is a different thing to saying, please continue. You might, keep continuing.
The experiment needs you to continue.
Yeah, you're kind of doing it of your own free will. But the second someone comes along and says, okay, we're removing your free will from the equation. You have no choice. That's when you go, hang on, wait a sec. No, okay, I reversed my previous statement. I agree. That does make sense.
It's going to sound odd. Is there a politeness element in that being asked to continue going, yes, of course, we're being told you have to do it? You're like, well, if you're not going to be polite to me, I'm not going to be polite to you. No, I'm not sorting. Or it triggers a different part of the...
I know there's a whole thing about women, like these days, when you talk to them about how to stay safe, you say don't be polite. Don't, if you have a funny feeling about somebody that you're on a bus with, but you're like, oh, well, I shouldn't judge them by whatever external characteristics I'm judging them by. But there's so many stories okay, maybe there's only a 1 in a million chance that they're going to be a serial killer, but don't be polite, don't take that risk. And I don't know if it's women in particular are more likely to conform to being polite, but there's loads of examples of serial killers luring women by pretending to have a broken arm, and then oh, let me help you, and whoops, you're in the back of my car.
Oops.
So yeah, I think this plays into one of the theories about this, which was Gilbert's foot in the door theory. So if you start with a small request, 10 volts, you can slowly, step by step, build up to a much larger request, like 400 volts. So you can start off by just give them a quick shock, and you can finish by kill them.
But they say that's how you get people to do things for you. You ask them to do a simple thing, for even as simple as oh, could you just pass that cup for me, or something like that. They've already established that giving you what you want relationship between the two of you, and you can build on that to get them to do more and more things for you.
Out of curiosity, Chris, have you read Cialdini on this? Basically, he did a book on influence, and you've gone through the bulk of the things they suggest you do in influence, but the one of the interesting ones you haven't touched on yet that is used in here is urgency. Making it seem like if you don't act now, it's all there is no opportunity. And so with the Capitol riot, it was no, Congress is going to ratify him in the next hour. We need to do something now. There is no other recourse after this. And then, of course, now they'll go and believe he's going to be re-inaugurated in presumably August now. But it's always the month after next or whatever. But that was the thing at the time, is they're stealing the election, and we've got to act now, on top of everything else.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that one, but yeah, it makes sense. It's a good point. So, does this theory apply to real life? Charles Hoefling did a very interesting field experiment in 1966. He He phoned up 22 nurses on duty in hospitals, told them he was a doctor whose name they didn't recognize, some new doctor they've never heard of before, and told them to prepare a certain dosage of a certain medicine to give to a certain patient. When the nurse went to the stockroom, they will find that this medicine isn't approved and the dosage being given is lethal. And 21 out of 22 nurses complied.
Wow. But admittedly, like, that was in the 60s, right?
That was in the 60s.
Yeah.
And yeah, what they said is that they were told at the time their role was to comply.
Yeah.
They did not question doctors.
That was my question, is like, surely we have things in society that kind of inoculate us against this kind of conformity these days, like whether it's like in my bus example or whatever, it's like stranger danger or other things. Like, do you know if there are sort of successful things that like help prevent this kind of blind conformity?
Yeah, so there's two things that immediately came to mind. One of them is, my sister is a medical professional, not a doctor, and quite often has to knock more junior doctors down a peg or two because they basically are like, how dare you challenge me? It's like, yeah, but if you do this, you're going to break the guy's neck. Yes, I see that. Okay. And so, like, yes, okay, that's sort of the system working a bit, but where there is ego and power, you will end up with a culture of just do as I say, because otherwise.
It reminds me of the aftermath of that horrible air disaster on the Canary Islands. I just had the example that you're thinking of, the Hey Chief thing.
That was the other one I was going to say, which was that, basically you had a fairly venerable, maybe this isn't quite the right one.
No,
you had a very senior pilot who was basically a legend, and a very new co-pilot, and they were on the runway picking up speed to take off, and the senior pilot did some sort of tick with his head, and the co-pilot thought that meant raise the landing gear, even though they didn't have enough speed to take off, and it caused them to crash, and the senior pilot lost his paralyzed.
No, I'm thinking of a different example where they know from the transcripts in the black box that there was a misinterpretation of the use of the words like you're good, you're okay to take off. And they've since changed the use of air traffic terminology to restrict the use of that term specifically to accelerating down the runway in order to take flight. Whereas the air traffic controller used the term casually to be like, you're good to take off to like towards the runway. And there was an audio problem. The wrong plane interpreted the signal. And you had two planes accelerate towards each other at takeoff speed, and everybody died. But on the audio tape, you hear the junior pilot say, I think we heard that wrong. And the senior pilot saying, no, we didn't. And
there was a psychologist that did a survey of various black box recordings, and he found a lot of aircraft crashes are caused because a junior pilot won't stand up to his senior pilot.
Yeah. Wow. So, but there's now, but the Hey Chief thing that Erica is referring to is part of a comedy sketch, but it's referencing sort of real life training of junior pilots basically being taught how to manage more senior pilots and say basically, hey, you've made a mistake, because obviously the cost of making the mistake is incredibly high. But there's all sorts of checks and balances in theory.
So this idea of performing your role brings us rather obviously onto Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment.
Everyone's favorite prison experiment.
We all know it. We all hate it.
I think it's a very interesting experiment. It's obviously terrible for the participants, but
there was a recent docudrama on Netflix, at some point in the last 3 years, that dramatized it. It was really fascinating.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know, Zimbardo took, I think it was, 12 random university students. He assigned half of them to be prison guards, half of them to be prisoners, and simulated a prison in the basement of Stanford University.
Importantly, during one summer, when there was no other staff around.
Ah, yeah, okay.
He really, I mean, he had them properly arrested, didn't he, by genuine police. The police went and arrested the criminals. They were strip searched. They were processed in the way that they would do proper prisoners and stuff. So, yeah.
They were publicly arrested in front of their family and neighbors.
Yes,
fingerprinted at the station, strip searched, given these things on their head to simulate having their head shaved. They wore a symbolic chain and lock around their ankle to remind them they had no freedom. They were referred to by numbers. And at the same time, he gave the guards the billy club of power and these mirrored sunglasses. So all this de-individuation going on so they would conform to their roles. And very famously, he had to cancel his experiment after 6 days because his girlfriend said, "What the hell are you doing? These people are being abused."
It was supposed to be a 2-week experiment, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Something like
that. What do we make of the Stanford prison experiment?
Well, it was like the really interesting thing for me was how quickly they devolved into their roles, and how quickly you ended up with this really toxic culture from both sides. Like the guards were worse than the prisoners.
I think the way the prisoners took on their own roles is often ignored in this experiment.
They did. I mean, they in the space of six days, they went from being fully functioning individuals to, I think 2 or 3 of them had breakdowns and had to be replaced. One of the guards had to be replaced, and basically came in and pretty much turned around and just went, "What the hell is this?" But very quickly then we went on to conform. And it was just this role. It's the same thing as with the previous one, in that an authority figure told them to act like this to the guards, and then the guards were the authority figure for the prisoners.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. Zimbardo said he didn't tell them to act like this.
Oh no, well, he told them to act like prison guards, and so they were safe in their knowledge. Like they were. Yeah.
When you look at it, he definitely encouraged them to behave violently. He claims he didn't. He claims this is just how they took on their roles. But no, if you look at it closely, he definitely encouraged this behavior. He came into this experiment with a prefixed idea.
But probably not wanting to go this far.
I thought there was also, like, obviously, like, for ethical reasons, we can't reproduce the exact experiment. But I thought there was also, like, difficulties in interpreting this because there's a lot of nuance in, like, what might have been going on. And it's difficult to see how it generalizes to the rest of the population.
So there has never been a peer-reviewed report on this published. Zimbardo went straight to the media.
But I mean, somewhat related, there have been experiments where they look at how being assigned to sort of arbitrary groups will make you feel about other people. And they literally go, okay, you're in red group, you're in blue group, and then people will start to view the other group differently. No reason to. And so the in-group, out-group mentality very much comes into play. And I think when you put it in an extreme situation where literally you have one group of people who control what the other group of people can do, you can see how that can escalate very quickly. And bringing it back to the topic at hand, when you have, you have the group, the in-group is, the people who feel that they're morally right, they're standing up for what the country should be, and the out group is literally trying to steal your democracy. I mean, you can definitely see how, if we take the prison experiment as legitimate, as showing that people will, go into their roles, will feel themselves given the liberty to go further than they normally would. By the authority figure, I think there's even though the experiment was rubbish and there's so much wrong with it, I think
you're a former research psychologist, right? So
I think there are elements we can take from it. There are things we can look at that are reflected in more well done experiments that can give us information in this.
So yeah, I was particularly interested in the idea of the taking on the role, because you see these guys in their militia uniforms, or Angeli in whatever costume that was, and you generally get the feeling these guys are LARPing. This is a role play that's gone out of hand.
Yeah.
Let's pretend to be revolutionaries. So yeah, what was this? Were they taking on a role when on that day? Do you think?
I think so. I think in a certain respect they may. So yeah, I mean, ignoring the cosplayers, as you say, you had people who were essentially they're there. Let's say your average person is there. They feel very strongly that Donald Trump actually won the election, that what's going on is wrong, and then they are told your role is to save the country. What are you going to do in that situation? Are you going to live up to the role you've been given by the leader of your country? It's so I can see people feeling that because they've been given a role by the president to save the country, that they would feel that they are justified in fulfilling that role, going further than they would normally.
I think there's a question about there's a difference between explaining the behavior and excusing the behavior, and that's like the paradigm that was set in the Nuremberg trials is just because you can explain why this happened doesn't mean that you absolve someone of their responsibility. And I think I do prefer to live in a world where the Nazi prison guards were found guilty.
Oh yeah, again, this is what I was chatting with Ellen earlier about. We were saying that much more so than the media influence, we can see how the social influence could, on the day, I'm caught up in the moment, everybody else is doing it, they're saying it's the right thing to do, I will do it, but it doesn't absolve you of individual responsibility, and it doesn't make you any less guilty.
Yeah, but it helps us understand how to prevent this from happening in future. That's why it's worth studying.
Yes, exactly.
So something that doesn't get talked about the Zimbardo experiment very much is only 1/3 of the guards became tyrannical.
Yes.
1/3 were tyrannical, 1/3 were what he described as tough but fair, and 1/3 were what he described as good guards.
So 1/3 out of 6. So 2 people.
Exactly. And one of those, the John Wayne character, who's sort of the ringleader of all this, is it appears he was actually a drama student who was really trying to play into his role.
Wow.
And wanted to see how far he could push it.
Wow.
And since Zimbardo also wanted him to see how far he could push it, and had cast himself in a role in the simulation,
no
one was
because he was the warden, wasn't he?
He was the prison supervisor. His assistant was the warden. He cast the 2 people that were supposed to control this into roles in the simulation.
Which also prevented them from being objective about when to...
Somewhat.
Which is why his girlfriend had to be brought in to stop this. So, yeah, actually, the experiment has been repeated at least twice, I found.
They did a TV one, didn't they?
They did a TV one. First one was done in Australia, where they didn't de-individuate the prisoners, and everything went fine. There was no problem.
Wow.
And then there was the BBC one, where actually the prisoners ended up taking control. They installed a sort of Marxist utopia, which then failed. And as always, when Marxism fails, it devolved into tyranny.
Yeah.
So this is why we've got to keep a very close eye on the England team since their failure against Italy. Since their Marxist policies failed, I'm fairly certain England team is going to devolve into tyranny.
Okay.
So it looks like Zimbardo's experiment was well dodgy, and not an experiment. So Right, what are we left with? So, why do some people conform and obey and some people not? Milgram talked about something he called agentic shift. So he felt we have two states, an autonomous state and an agentic state. And if we see an authority figure as being legitimate and we believe in them, we will switch from our autonomous state to our agentic state and obey. What do you think? This is, you know, I was only obeying orders. This isn't store policy.
There is definitely an element of playing a role and what's expected of you, but it's not. That's not an excuse, and there is always an element inside you that says this is wrong. So, I work in finance, and I have to tell some people, no, I don't think it's right for us to do certain things. Not aggressive, and I think on the whole the company is a very good one, but wherever you've drawn the sort of wherever the center is for your company, there's some people on one side of it and some people on the other side of it. And even though sometimes people senior than me are saying, I think we should do this, and it is my role to help carry out their orders, I still see, personally, I certainly still see it as more important to say, no, this is wrong. This is either because it's immoral or because it's against.
Oh yeah, I think.
I was gonna say, I trained as a scientist. All of my training was defending my ideas against more senior peers. That's literally how you get a PhD. So it depends what's at stake. Like if it's the truth, then I will defend it. If someone's making a work, like if an authority figure makes it a request, like, can you please queue over there? I'm not gonna, that's not a hill. Even if I think that's an inefficient queuing system, which I have thought in the past, I'm not gonna be like, listen, you need to redo everything else, but whatever, they'll follow you. I'll follow what you say.
Yeah, I think it does sort of come down to what you're being asked to do. Because I know in my job that there are things where the higher ups will say we're going to do X. I will then whinge consistently for months on end about why we should do Y, but I will do X in the process because that's what my job is and that's what I'm being told by my bosses to do. But in that case, it's not life or death. It's not anything, it's not anything immoral. It's not anything that's going to hurt anybody. It's just maybe I have a slightly different view on how we should reach the same goal we're all aiming for. But I think once you get to, your job is to gas Jews, I think there should be some question in.
Nice example. Thanks for that one.
Yes. But I think at that point you can't just the whole following orders thing sort of falls apart. I mean, I suppose in that circumstances there was an aspect of if they didn't follow orders, their own lives could have been potentially forfeit, and so you have that element of it, which is, I would say, is fair enough. But I think once you get to a point where you knowingly know you are doing something immoral that you would probably yourself consider immoral, but you're using the excuse that someone told you to do it, I think that you've definitely entered into personal responsibility territory there.
So Kelman and Hamilton theorized there are basically two binding forces: this rule orientation, where you feel you're powerless to challenge authority and you feel you have to follow the rules, and role orientation, which is what Zimbardo supposedly chose, where you feel you have to behave according to the expectations of your role. And if you're in this role and the rules are there, how far will you go? It seems from these experiments, 1/3 of people will go all the way. So what is this 1/3? Where does this 1/3 come from? So
It's interesting that 1/3 seems to be quite a consistent number across all of the.
If only we had some personality tests that we could do to consistently identify these characteristics. Oh wait, that's really hard.
And kill them all so they don't do this again.
Oh wait.
Wow, that escalated.
I think that Sam might be the one.
I think you just failed the test.
Yeah, I think.
No, I don't think I'm the 1/3. I'm the opposite, aren't I? Because it's about influence. I'm not influenceable. I just
You're the influencer.
Yeah, I'm just plain evil.
So yeah, Steiner believed that, along with Adorno, that there's this. Some people just have this authoritarian personality, and when they did the F-scale test on some of Milgram's participants, they found the ones that continued to 450 scored highly on the F-scale, and the ones that did not, that rebelled fairly early, scored lowly on the F-scale.
So good news for us.
So that hopefully that means we wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
Irving Straub, on the other hand, believed that we're all like this, and it's just situational factors that decide if we go all the way or not. So yeah, is it dispositional or is it situational?
Wait and see. So
from the dispositional aspect, we can look at Rotter's locus of control, which was the other test I got you all to do. So Rotter's idea was those people that feel they are in control of their lives and responsible for their own actions are less likely to conform and obey than those that externalize this power. And is this something you came across when you were looking at conspiracy theories, Andrew?
Yes, sorry, I just got a message. We're going to go pick someone up in a little bit. So, yeah, yeah. So, say your thing again. Sorry, my brain skipped a second.
So the locus of control, the second test I got you to do.
Yes. Yeah. So people who who think that that they're influenced from outside, rather than making their own ways and stuff. I get it's something I didn't only touched on when I was looking into conspiracy theories. It did come up, but yeah, you have people who don't like authority, who don't like being told what to think. Very much, I find my own answers to questions. It doesn't matter what the entire body of science is saying. If this doesn't match with my personal experience and things, then I'm going to reject it. So while that isn't necessarily the same sort of thing that we were doing the test on, I think that definitely comes into play there.
I do wonder if there is, from a sort of a political point of view, if you feel like you have a great deal of personal agency, well, I suppose agency is personal, then to a certain extent, maybe you don't mind if the situation around you isn't great, because you still feel like you can retain control over your outcome. Whereas if you feel like your well-being is incredibly linked to the well-being of the people immediately around you and as the nation as a whole, if you're part of this riot that turned insurrection, then you might feel the need to do what you can in order to improve the lot of the people around you and of the nation as a whole. Because you can't control yourself personally, you can have a small impact on the overall environment, and that environment then in turn affects you.
But I also think, having done this test, that it's that believing that you have control over circumstances, which scientifically is demonstrable that you do not, it might make you happy, but as a skeptic and as a scientist, it's factually not correct. So I felt a little bit like I did the test, and I scored highest out of all of us. That I believe I have the most control over my life, apparently. But
I believe I've got the least. So.
Yeah,
again.
But it was still like, maybe you should take responsibility for your success more. And I'm like, no, listen, I understand how statistics works. I did not get this job because I'm the best person in the entire world at my job. I got my job through a combination of luck and skill, and you're not going to be able to persuade me that I'm this amazing megalomaniac like person who has incredible self-belief. Like I know that there was a random chance to the world.
I think all of the questionnaires we did ended with that in order to get you to pay for the next the full report. So
it's like you scored this, but you're also deeply flawed in a way that you have to pay more to find out.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But how to solve that problem? Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop it there. So
Cool.
I had a lot more, but I think I'll save that for part 2.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, were these guys dispositionally presupposed to storm the Capitol, or were they carried away by the situational influence, or was it a combination of the two?
It sounds like they might have been predisposed to being influenced and then were influenced into carrying it at the same time. Does that absolve them of any criminal responsibility?
No.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to say
so.
no.
No, I agree with Sam. I think that you had, I mean, first of all, you kind of talking self-selected people. These were people who went to the event, even if they didn't expect it to go as far as it did. They went to the rally with the intention of making their voices heard, saying that we don't agree with what's going on. And I think, so there's your predisposition. And then from that, you have the influence of someone giving you permission to do it, of assigning roles to you, of then various people telling you can go one step further and you can go one step further, and then looking at everybody else around you and seeing that, oh, okay, the whole crowd is doing this, well, I'll do it as well. And I think all of the things you've said come into play. But I don't think, as Erica said, I don't think that absolves you in any way of personal responsibility. I think, there's lots of people, like you said, coming after it saying, oh, I knew it was wrong. But we got caught up in it. Coming back to this question of whether this is sort of a valid defense, I think it's a genuinely interesting one, because I think this is a much more valid defense than the media one, because I guess you probably claim something like temporary insanity. I was caught up in the moment. I had all of this stuff going on, influencing me, telling me to do this thing, and I wouldn't normally do it. But in that situation, I was driven to do it. And I wasn't thinking how I would normally do it. So I think a defense could be made.
I think it's at best mitigating, in the way that, there were some people who turned up with Civil War T-shirts on and like tactical gear and zip ties pre-made into handcuffs and proper balaclavas and stuff. Those people, you turn around and go, yeah, that's not just breaking into the Capitol, that's premeditated breaking into the Capitol and like intent to something. Whereas some of the other people who were swept up weren't intending to, but they still did it. So it's the difference between like premeditated murder and spontaneous murder. Like, it's premeditated murder is worse, but they're both still murder.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm done. Anyone else?
So let me pitch you guys what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. Chris, you're not going to be here, but it's fine. I think we can just have a hand-drawn picture of you, and that will stand in. But also, you will be very, yeah, exactly. It'll be a flattering one. Don't worry. But next time we are going to be talking about something that actually Chris participated in. So he'll be with us in spirit. This is what we did. So the 4 of us got together plus 2 other people, and we did a science experiment. We tested two different experiments. One was, can we tell the difference between Pepsi Max, Coke Zero, and regular Coke? And can we tell the difference between Posh crisps and regular crisps, like store brand, sort of NAF brand crisps? of the same flavor. Those are the two hypotheses we were testing. And I'm going to tell you that the experimental methodology was really, really interesting that we took. But the question is, did it work? Can we actually tell the difference? These guys don't know the answer. Well, Sam knows the answer. But Andrew and Chris don't know the results of the experiment. I'm going to share it later.
And I might do some voodoo to demonstrate how this stuff can be abused.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna have a look, and there's gonna be spreadsheets, and there's gonna be really simple math, 0 equations, like no crazy statistics.
You're really selling this now.
It's gonna be math, maybe.
Spreadsheets. God.
Yeah, but I'm gonna show you guys how anyone, without knowing anything about statistics, can work out the truth. Like you can work out whether this result is real or whether it's a result of random chance. And you don't have to know any equations. You don't have to know anything. It's just all based on addition and subtraction, division and multiplication. You can work it out.
But as participants, we're definitely not going to be stripped and abused at any point.
No.
I promise that. And that was definitely also not what happened when we got together to eat crisps and drink cola. It was not part of the experiment.
It just happened anyway.
That was the after party. That was
exactly.
We're not going to go into that. So with that having been said, I hope you join us in 2 weeks to find out the results of our experiment. In the meantime, leave us a comment, give us a suggestion for a topic you'd like us to cover, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.